Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm here with my co-host Zach, and I just wanted to thank all of our listeners for having us, for just for participating in this with us, and we're really enjoying it, and we're really excited for today's guest. Zach, would you like to introduce him?
We have today with us Rob Faucher. Rob, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, and thanks for having me on the show.
It is very much our pleasure. Could you just give us a short rundown of who you are, what you're all about, what you do?
Sure. What I do right now is I'm self-employed. I own a couple of cottages out in Prince Edward Island that we rent out for vacations. I'm also working for a small consulting company doing import consulting and duty recovery. And prior to that, I was in the corporate world for quite a number of years, working as a sales executive. And prior to that, I was in the USA, working in the defense industry as well as teaching. I was a programmer. And prior to that, I was working in the computer games industry in Toronto, doing various work in multimedia and so on. I also taught courses in programming as well as multimedia. Academically, my background is kind of a bit diversified. I have degrees in history and philosophy as well as computer science. So one foot in the humanities, one foot in computer science. One I did out of love, one I did because I need money. I'll let you figure out which is which.
Well, one feeds your soul, the other feeds your body, right?
Exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Right.
Wow.
Right.
So you've got a diverse resume here. What in all this travel of both intellectually and in this landscape of thought, but also geographically, what did you find you loved most about Canada as you were both away and here, and you've been throughout Canada now, and you have these cottages on PEI, one of the two provinces I have yet to visit of the whole country.
Really?
I've been to every other
you gotta
one.
Come out here sometime.
I got to. Yes,
Beautiful.
I'm actually really glad that we have someone from PEI on here because we've been lacking Maritimers for some reason.
Okay, well, at least we won't be talking about lobster today. So, actually, it's a good point about, what I love most about Canada. In fact, I think being away for almost 9 years and coming back here really made me appreciate Canada a lot more. And the way I kind of answer that question, I'm going to break it down into sort of three segments. One is nature of the environment, the other is political, and the third is culture. So speaking to the first point, what I love about Canada, especially as a motorcyclist, is our nature, just the vastness of the country, the amount of biodiversity, the plethora of wildlife once you get outside of cities, the open spaces, the fact that we're sandwiched between two oceans with I don't know how many thousands of kilometers of coastline. So for me, that is really important feature of Canada. In fact, I would go so far as to say that without nature, you really don't have Canada.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that for sure. Absolutely.
The second sort of category that I love about Canada is political. And I don't mean it in any kind of partisan way. I mean it in a general way. We're a peaceful country to start off with. You can go pretty much anywhere in this country and feel safe. We don't have a violent country. We have a stable democracy. In fact, one of the most stable democracies in the world. We're a tolerant country. We certainly see that in how we can welcome people from all other nations and walks of life. And they exist peacefully. They can coexist, in a way that you move from one neighborhood to the next, you're in a completely different world. I also think we're a compassionate country. We certainly do take care of people better than some other nations do. I'm not saying we're the best at it, but the fact is that we do have some level of welfare. We have healthcare. We have pensions. So we're good at looking after people in balance, I think.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah.
No,
the third aspect, I think, is cultural. And I do like the amount of different culture you can encounter across Canada. Certainly here in the Atlantic, we have our own very distinctive culture. There's a prairie culture. There's the very multicultural aspect of Toronto or Vancouver. So there's a lot of distinct regions, I think, in Canada that are part of a tapestry. We're not a melting pot. We're a stew here. I like a stew.
Yeah. Yeah, stews are flavorful.
They are flavorful. You don't want everything to turn into mush.
No. Then you're dealing with like a goulash or something. Not to say that there's anything wrong with goulash, but
Yeah, exactly. So that's in a nutshell sort of some of the key features I like about Canada.
Oh, that's maybe the most systematic and well thought out one we got so far. I really like that you put the effort into like really thinking about that. So we've been told that you motorcycled across this entire country. Can you share what that experience taught you about Canada and like kind of like you're even closer to it all when you're on a motorcycle and you're really just getting to experience it. And there is a great motorcycle culture in Canada. So why don't you share a bit about that maybe, and then also like what it was like just from an existential personal level.
Okay. Lesson number one. If you're going through the Rockies, ignore the forecast. It's going to be a hell of a lot colder than what's forecasted.
Once you get up there, right, it gets cold.
It certainly does. So the one trip, it was my longest trip across Canada, started from Ontario. I was living in Ajax at the time. So one of the things that strikes you as you go on that journey is how much time it takes to get out of Ontario, just how big the provinces are.
It's huge.
Huge. And, you know, I mean, as a kid, you certainly read about all these places, you know, like Sudbury, you want to go see the nickel and so on and so forth. So I just remember how much time it took to get up across Northern Ontario. And Northern Ontario is beautiful. It's got a very rugged terrain. It invites exploration. And you wake up every day kind of excited, thinking, well, what am I going to see next? It's a far cry from Southern Ontario, which tends to be flat. It's just, you know, it's the remnants of a glacier, whereas up north, it's rugged. Another thing is bring lots of bug spray.
Oh, yes, true.
I remember a couple of times parking to go look at a specific scene or something to that effect, and I'd be swarmed by bugs. So I just ran back to the bike and got away as fast as I could.
Yep. Especially in those kind of like early to midsummer months, like in Algonquin region, it's just you get eaten alive, or further up in the Yukon, they just are. They say that the mosquitoes are so big there they could carry you away.
That's true, actually. Not as bad as the ones I've seen in Minnesota, but that's another story. And then, you know, just how much you find the country changes once you leave Ontario. Manitoba, to me, is sort of an extension of Ontario, at least in terms of the geography of or the feel of the landscape. So, not to disparage anything about Manitoba, but it's not something where you're going to find a lot of mountains. You're not going to find a lot of water. It's great to go across it. It's wide open. The Trans-Canada is never busy there, so you definitely have that sense of freedom that you're not going to find, say, in a big city. So just that in of itself gives you a kind of, for lack of a better term, zen. You're just at one with everything, the machine, yourself, the landscape. And there's a real beauty in doing something like that. And of course, then you cross in Saskatchewan and you find wheat fields and everything else. Again, the culture changes a bit, but also the landscape changes, the sort of the colors you would find. So if you imagine you're a painter, especially an impressionist painter, you would have a very different color palette, say, between Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Then, of course, finally, when you cross into Alberta, well, what defines that? It's going to be the Rockies.
Yes, absolutely.
So, you know, you're going to go on the long haul in a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 days through the Rockies. Now, I think it was the tail end of July, and I looked at the forecast. And so I looked at places like Lake Louise and so on. It said it was going to be maybe 10 or 12 degrees. Well, the forecast was off by at least that much.
Yep. And it gets colder at night.
Oh, it certainly does. So it was already a cool summer that year, and just it never quite warmed up. Even when I went through Calgary, you know, which is going to be warmer than going inside the Rockies. It was a little bit chilly, but I had a jacket and I was quite comfortable there. So as I started climbing up the Rockies, making my way towards Lake Louise, it got cold, and it was cold enough that there was wet snow falling, and I wasn't prepared for it.
Right.
So, okay, fine. You could think I can pull off, I can do something. Well, no, you don't have a lot of options up there. You just keep going. you hop off the bike, you might want to warm up, take some photos and so on. But that's another thing that's great about going across Canada. If you're a photographer, it never ceases to reward you with amazing images.
Yes.
So finally, when I did get up to the top of the Rockies, I was cold, I was shivering, bit miserable, but not upset, because I was rewarded with amazing scenery going up there, just simply stunning and breathtaking. And they're images I still have hanging on my walls in the house, and I look back at them with fond memories. Again, it was a bit cold and miserable. Finally got down through Vancouver, took the ferry to the island. And again, that was a different experience, just how much even the terrain changes. Like, you get a more rugged kind of a gray tones in Alberta. Then you get into BC, it becomes more green. You're cognizant that you're now entering rainforest and so on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course, you do see the odd bear on the side of the road. Of course, at night, I don't motorcycle through any of those places because I have a survival instinct. You got to worry about moose.
Yep.
God knows what else. So when the sun goes down, you get yourself settled, and that's it. Wait till sun comes up and get back on the road. And I spent a couple of days out in Vancouver. I made it to mile 0 of the Trans-Canada, which was amazing. And I think they had a marker there, a Terry Fox statue, literally mile 0 of the Trans-Canada Highway. So I did get out that far. So that was a big scratch off on the bucket list.
Yes.
Now, where I am now in Eastern Canada, I'd never made a lot of trips from Ontario to Eastern Canada. The furthest I ever gotten was New Brunswick. And I went to this area in Acadie called Mosquitoes, and I was overnighting there. And then I had a big Kawasaki touring bike, and the clutch was starting to die on me before I got there. It was slipping. So this is a small town. It has one motorcycle dealership, and it's not a Kawasaki dealership.
Right.
Where was I going to get the clutch plates? Where was I going to get the parts? So I went to the library to take basically the internet connection for the town, found a dealership in, I think it was Moncton, and ordered the parts. And I had to stay in Miscou for a number of days. So while I was there, I thought, well, I can do the job myself. I'm somewhat good at turning a wrench. And I know to spin the nut off the clutch plate, I needed an impact wrench. One of those things that, you see, like, even when they got a car tie that comes off. And so I just asked the guy at the motorcycle shop, do you know anyone in town who has an impact wrench? Next thing you know, about 6 total strangers are showing up with impact wrenches.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And I think that speaks to the generosity and kindness of people in Eastern Canada. It's like, after a while, I'm sitting there, putting together the clutch plates, and like, guys, can you stop bringing me impact wrenches? I don't need one.
But they just heard that you needed them. Wow.
That's right.
That is the Canadian story.
Was kind enough to drive me 2.5 hours to go to Moncton to pick up the parts. The only price I had to pay is listen to him grumble about his girlfriend in French for 2.5 hours. But we made it there and came back and got the bike put back together, and I got back to Toronto.
Wow. I love that. That is so. Did you find that was kind of the case across the country, is just a friendliness, or way more in the East?
I think you need to segment that according to whether you're talking city or rural.
Right.
And that's also been my experience motorcycling across the USA. I find that once you get outside the big cities, people are a lot more helpful. And I also find in general that people who are average working class people tend to be more generous and kind because they know what it is to struggle.
Right. True.
It's kind of a side note. I know there's sort of this trope that Canadians tend to be more polite or kind than Americans. And I would say that's not necessarily true, because I've certainly found a lot of examples of kindness or welcoming to strangers in rural America. And I also found sometimes hostility or just a callousness in American cities. So I think you find it in both places in the same country, city versus rural. It's going to change the dynamic of how people deal with you.
Can we go into that more? What do you think it is about that because there's a lot of perhaps also denigration of rural people, like that they're stupid or that they don't understand the world, that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I was raised in a town with 14 houses in it called Haines, Alberta. So I know the rural life very well, and I've always found like what you said to be true. There's more community, there's less competition, and more like if your neighbor knows that you can't plow your driveway, they'll plow your driveway for you, kind of stuff. And that just doesn't seem to happen as much in the cities. What do you think it is? Is it just that we're closer to nature, or what?
That's a interesting question. I haven't given it that much thought, but I think on the surface, when people know what it is to struggle, I think they tend to have more empathy for others because it's a shared experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think too that in cities, particularly in the suburbs around places like Toronto, Vancouver, where the cost of living is very high and you need to have a high income in order to make a go of it, there is a competitiveness. And I also think too that, you know, I'm oversimplifying the matter perhaps a bit, but if you find your neighbors got a nicer car than you want to have a nicer car than your neighbors. So there's all this one-upmanship.
Yes, true.
And
And you're so close to your neighbors, so you kind of are always watching them.
Yeah. And I found this too when I was living in America. I was married to a New Yorker many years ago, and they came from a well-to-do family. And one thing I did notice, and this probably speaks to your point with one good example, they had neighbors who were very well off as well. And if one of their fortunes fell, say, for example, they might have been invested in a certain business or had a certain number of stocks and their fortunes collapse, they tend to get marginalized or ostracized because you're not one of us anymore.
Oh, really? Interesting.
And that I saw that happen. But on the other hand, I think when it happens in a rural area, people are more willing to help you. So-and-so is down on their fortune. You know, let's see what we can do to maybe give them a hand to make it through the next whatever period. I also found that to be very much in the spirit of the biker community in the US. Again, these tended to be largely working class people. I was a member of a couple motorcycle clubs in the US. And before Obamacare, paying medical bills was a big struggle for people. So one of my friends, his wife was afflicted with cancer. So we had a couple of rallies for her just to afford medications. So everyone pitches in that case because you think to yourself, that could be me tomorrow.
Right, exactly. So it's a real sense of taking care of your community. What got you into the biker community? Can you share us a bit about that? That's because it's a very unique, and I find it's the Canadian spirit encapsulated to some degree, right? Because it's like out on the road, adventure, strength and honor kind of stuff.
That's part of it. I think the lure of the open road is a big, big draw. I think what really got me into it was my first ever visit to the American Southwest. At the time, I was living in Arlington, Massachusetts, working for a company that was a defense contractor. So when you're around an area like Boston or its surrounding suburbs, you feel congested. You never get away from masses of people.
Right.
So what most people did on the weekends to get away from that is they would go up to either New Hampshire or go to Maine. But it's a bit like cottage traffic in Toronto. So if you have a holiday weekend, you're stuck in traffic. You just can't seem to get away from masses of people.
Right.
When am I going to be able to press the gas pedal and make the speed limit? You have that frustration. So I've been reading various books on Route 66. It still has a very special place in my heart because I've traveled it many times. And I sort of fell into the romance of Route 66. So I decided to go explore it on my own. So I took a plane to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and rented an SUV there so I could at least go to as far as Arizona. So again, landing in Albuquerque and seeing the Sandia Mountains, like, oh my God, this is beautiful. Now, I wasn't really into motorcycling at the time, but when I landed there and I started driving around, I thought, wow, there's a very big biker culture here. Everywhere you go, there's guys exploring the road, whether individually or in groups. It was pervasive. And when you start driving around there, you look at that horizon, which is infinite, these deep blue skies and mountains in the distance. for me, it pulls you in. It's like a magnet. You just want to keep flowing through to the point where there's no end, because it is endless in a way. And I think finally when I got to Arizona and got to see places like Oak Creek Canyon or Sedona and the curvy roads, I thought, my God, this has to be amazing to explore on a motorcycle. So eventually I decided, well, New England wasn't for me. Big cities weren't for me, and they're still not to this day. And I moved to Arizona. As soon as I could, I got my license and bought my first bike, and then upgraded to a proper touring bike, and never looked back since. That bike, before someone T-boned me with it in Canada, had, if I translate it to miles, 127,000 kilometers on it.
Wow.
And since then, I've crossed Canada to the Rockies and to the West Coast, as I mentioned. And I've also had the privilege of exploring the East Coast here to some degree. And I will tell you this, anyone who's a motorcyclist, you owe it to yourself to go on the Cabot Trail.
Yes. I was about to ask you about that. Like, well, probably one of the greatest roads of all in the world.
I think so.
Yeah.
I've been to Europe a couple times.
Let's dig
I've been
into
all
this.
over the American
Tell us
Southwest.
about that. Tell us about that first time driving down that road on a motorcycle.
I don't know if you're allowed to censor words or not.
No, no, we don't censor here.
All right. Well, let me sanitize it. It's a holy crap moment when you first encounter it. It's just so incredibly beautiful, big, dynamic in terms of its changing features, and just all these sort of little inlets of water everywhere. And then, of course, there's always mist in the morning. It's breathtaking. And the roads are of such a nature that it's not just this long, continuous line like when you drive through, say, Manitoba. It twists and turns and curves. It undulates, which is great if you're on a bike. And there's so many spots where you can pull off and just take whatever time you want to soak in the scenery. And again, anyone who's been on the Cabot Trail would know what I'm talking about. And I would also say, too, that when you're on the Cabot Trail, you're close to so many other great things that are accessible within a day, depending on what part of the trail you're on. So if you're at the beginning of the trail, you're not that far away from the Bay of Fundy.
Yeah. You got whales right there. You got icebergs floating by.
Well, yeah, depending on the time of year.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one yet. They used to tell me there was more icebergs here in PEI during the summer months. You could see them, but climate change, they don't happen anymore.
Yeah, true enough.
But yeah, it's definitely go see the Bay of Fundy. There's the Hopewell Rocks Park in New Brunswick. If you haven't been out here, I highly recommend it. And again, it's just so much to explore on a motorcycle. And being in PEI, it's all at my fingertips, so to speak.
Yeah.
Everything's a day or two away.
Well, in PEI, like share with us what is the culture and the spirit of PEI like? Because we haven't had anyone from PEI yet. So like someone who loves the place, that's what this podcast is all about, loving place, right? Tell us about this place that you've come to love.
Okay, well, let me tell you how I came to love it.
Yes.
I think it was just over about 3 years ago. Now, my wife and I came here on vacation. I was looking at a couple of travel sites, and I thought, well, this looks really great. I haven't been out the East Coast on New Brunswick, so let's check out PEI. And we came here. We were here about a week. We had rented a Jeep and explored a lot of the island. And the great thing about the islands, you can go from one end to the other in a day,
right?
Provided you're not stopping and seeing things. But we fell in love with it. And I came back kind of smitten. We took the plane back to Toronto. And then when the plane landed and we were stuck in traffic for 2.5 hours trying to get home, I said to her, well, that's it. I've had enough of the rat race. I've had enough of all this congestion. I said, I swear, come hell or high water, by this time next year, we're going to be living in Prince Edward Island. And so it came to pass.
Okay, I want to go into that because I feel like that is a big part of even just the Canadian story from an immigration perspective, and what, like you said, we're such vast open spaces. What is Canada without nature? And so much of the Canadian story is going back to nature, right? So you're like, I'm tired of the rat race. Walk us through that existential process that you went through, where you're like, no, I want a different sort of life for myself than this small, congested, rushed, hurried
Mhm.
existence that happens so often in the cities.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of maybe two layers that leap out. One is a desire to be surrounded by beauty.
Ah, yes.
The second is to find ways to feel part of a community in which your identity has some meaning, that you're not just this cog in a vast machine, this one of a million ants marching into a city every day to sit in a cubicle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you get the sense that there's a part of your life that's impoverished by doing that. It's not spiritually fulfilling, for lack of a better term. So I think you want, I would think I wanted a bit more autonomy of the self. I wanted to own a business. I wanted to be able to work from home. So it was a reclamation of personal autonomy. And again, to the point about meaningful connections with other people, we talked about this, rural versus city. I found here that I'm already being more ensconced into a community than I felt that I ever was in Toronto. So, for example, in the motorcycle club at Harley Owners Group, the chairman is the former Minister of Agriculture and the Environment. So
right,
you realize in a province this size, like, my God, politicians are in charge of a whole province whose population, its entirety, is significantly smaller than Scarborough or Mississauga, for example.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You feel connected to someone who might be able to do something or help you out in a way. I also found too that I'm able to make connections with farmers, fishermen, and so on. So it's nice to get that fresh food. In fact, I got a story here that speaks to this type of point. I know a couple of weeks ago you interviewed my good friend Paul Fairfield on the podcast.
Yes, we did. Yes.
So after I'd moved here, I took the train to go back to Ajax, Ontario, to pull my Harley Davidson out of storage to ride it here. So when I was on the train, it was a 2-day trip. It stopped in Montreal. So there was a guy from PEI on the island, old islander. Well, I mean old in terms of chronologically. It's just he's lived his life here.
Yes, exactly.
And he didn't speak a lick of French. So when we had to exchange trains in Montreal, he said, "Do you know what this means or what that means?" And I said, "Yes, I'm bilingual." So we got to talking. So here's the funny bit. I said, "Well, what are you going to Ontario for? And where are you going?" He says, "Kingston. That's where Paul is." And
right.
He says,
yeah.
I said, "Okay, I'm going to Ajax, but I'm going to be overnighting in Kingston to stay with my best friends because I'm getting my motorcycle out of storage. I'll go spend some time with him and then ride back." And he says, "Well, I'm actually getting a motorcycle I just bought from a guy in Kingston."
What?
No way.
No way. And did you guys ride back together?
Well, yeah. And then I said, "Who are you buying it from?" He says, "A professor at Kingston at Queen's University." I was like, that's an uncanny coincidence.
That is. Wow.
We rode back and I made my first friend in PI. I hadn't even been here 2 weeks.
Now you guys are like tight, I imagine.
Now we're buddies. And, I've developed a nice little network of friends here. But again, my buddy there, he knows a lot of people here. We can't go and have a coffee where he doesn't run into someone he knows.
Right.
You can go across the whole province and you just run into people you know all the time. So it's like, and it's great because he knows all the fish. He knows a number of fishermen there. So we get lobster dirt cheap. One of his best friends is a sheep farmer and chicken farmer, one of the largest in the island. So I buy that stuff off the farm.
Yes, right from where it's grown.
Yeah, and I'm surrounded by farms now, which is great. I love going outside every night and not hearing the din of a city, the sirens, looking at industrial complexes like I used to look outside my front window in Ajax.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't sit there and look at a warehouse or a commercial mall and go, the serenity, all the beauty.
The beauty, yeah.
You sit there and go, when the hell am I going to get away from this?
I can echo that sentiment.
I absolutely love that story where you like that. And that's actually an interesting Canadian kind of thing because we are a smaller population country. You often can find connections because all of the circles are so much smaller. I find my career's mostly in Canadian politics, and like everyone is 1 degree separated from someone that you know who was an MP or worked on the Hill or something, right? And it's a beautiful thing. It's a community, right? It's a family to some degree.
Yeah, and I feel part of it. It's like, and I think if I spend X number more years here, I'll feel even more connected with people. And certainly, being a small business owner, I've connected with other small business owners. And the great thing too is, even in the cottage rental business, people aren't competitive; they're helpful.
Right. Wow.
Again, speaking to the way connections work, when we moved here, we had a challenge to overnight. Why? Because we were bringing 4 animals with us.
Oh,
and as you know, a lot of places don't accept animals, especially parrots. So my wife found this place in PEI that allowed pets and birds. Very friendly chap. He's actually an expat from England. And when we checked in, I got to chatting with him. And it turns out he was also from Durham County in Ontario. He was from Pickering, the next town over from Ajax.
Yep.
And he had been here 4 years. He was running these cottages, 14 cottages down by the South Shore. And so we got to talking, and now we're good friends. So, and I never knew anything about being in the cottage business. I thought, well, I have some money. I'm not a stockbroker. I don't understand stocks, but I understand, sticking money in a savings account is stupid. So how can I make it grow? How can I make it work? And how can I do something that's fun and feed into my nature, which is to be gregarious and meet people from all walks of life and all around the world? Well, hell,
right. Yeah.
I saw 3 cottages for sale and I bought them. So we now talk about the business. We go, we can have lunches, and he's been very helpful to me. So people aren't trying to one up you. It's like, you're in the business, I'm in the business. We're comrades. We're not competitors in that direct sense of the word. And I found that a much more humane way of being.
Oh, I agree entirely. There's the bigger, or the closer you get to the big cities, the less people just by default take care of each other. And one of my favorite things, I've traveled across Canada quite a bit myself, and one of my favorite things about the smaller places that you go to is just, even though you aren't a part of that community, they make you a part of that community as soon as you arrive. And that is the most beautiful feeling. And it is something that has been lost from the big city life that I think people who spend their entire life in the city don't understand, that there's a more beautiful and caring side of humanity readily available. They just have to leave the city to get to it.
I agree. And I would also add to that the dynamics of that experience change around a motorcycle for some strange reason. If you have a car and you have out of province plates, people don't pay you much mind.
No,
because you could be there for travel, you could be there for business. But when you're on 2 wheels and you stop at a small town gas station or whatever, you usually get that kind of that one person. There's always that one person that comes up and says, "You're a long way from home."
What you doing around here?
Yeah. And so, and again, Zach, I know you talked about that, but I can think of it. One succinct experience that happened to me in the U.S. was one of my road trips across Route 66 after I'd moved back to Canada. And I was stopping in this little Route 66 town outside of Illinois. The name escapes me now, but it's famous for having this giant Paul Bunyan statue. So I stopped there, as I always do, to try and take some photos of the Paul Bunyan statue. Actually, he'd been converted into a spaceman. It was a Paul Bunyan statue. So it was converted into a space guy during the 60s. And the restaurant, unfortunately, got out of business because I used to eat chili or hot dogs there or whatever. And so as I'm taking photos of the lumberjack / spaceman, I hear that guy who says, "You're a long way from home," but this time with a German accent. And I said, "Sounds to me like you're a lot further away from home than I am." And it turns out he was a photojournalist from Switzerland. He was there covering some women's volleyball tournaments in California. So he arrived on the plane a bit early. He landed in Illinois and rented a car. to go all the way across to California because he had to report on this volleyball event. So, and I said, look, I've been across this road a lot of times, and because he was asking me questions, what do you need to see? Where can I go? I said, just follow me. I've done this a few times.
Right.
Turns out he's also a motorcyclist as well.
Oh, of course.
He's got a couple of vintage Harley Davidsons at his place in Zurich. And at the same time, too, there's a Japanese film crew there filming a documentary about Route 66. So this Japanese guy, I don't know from Jack, couldn't speak a lick of English, turns his camera and starts filming me, filming this statue. And I thought, well, that's cool. I kind of smiled and I said, well, how the hell do I approach this guy? Because I'm thinking, well, I'm guessing you're putting together a documentary for Japanese TV. I wouldn't mind seeing it. So I tried to talk to the guy. Well, obviously, there was a language barrier. So he hands me a Japanese business card, which I can't read. But that died on the vine. I never saw the document, but still, it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. And that's really I feel like what you said at the very beginning a little bit too is this openness, the open road. What in that concept do you think is so romantic to you, but also so Canadian? Because it does seem, at least for me, I've driven across the country about 5 or 6 times now, not all the way. I've done it all the way, but not congruently. What do you think it is about that is so spiritual, but also a Canadian spirituality in a sense?
Okay, I think I would have to unpack that question in 2 very different areas. And I think there's one that's universalizable, and there's one that might be specifically Canadian. To the first point about the romance or the lure of motorcycling, I think there's a number of things that feed into that. Certainly, there's been in the American tradition or the North American tradition a romanticizing of biker culture in film or in TV and so on. There is that sort of cheesy element of the outlaw biker or being that dangerous type of thing. And yes, that does happen. And I've known a number of people in those so-called 1%er clubs, but that's not what I'm belonging to. So that in itself, I think, creates a kind of mystery or allure to that. The other thing that I think you experience when you get past that, because that can be an initial way to draw it in, is that when you ride with a group of people or encounter a good friend you ride with, there is a real fraternity or sisterhood that exists in the motorcycle community. It's not superficial. The roots can go deep. So I've certainly made, throughout the years, many friends that I've known for decades through motorcycling. I still are still friends to this day. And I'm, like I just mentioned, my buddy here on the island. So there's a wonderful way that connects people. And unless you've ridden, it's very hard to sort of quantify or qualify the feeling or the sensation of exploring. Now, I am talking in the capacity of someone who's a cruiser, not a racer. I mean, some people might be all about speed, so they buy a Japanese bike, and it's all about how fast can I twist the throttle and not stay out of the gene pool.
Right.
But when you're a bit older, you're a bit more sensitive to your existence and vulnerability.
Fragility.
Yeah.
you are going to go slow. You want to sightsee. So I think it's a twofold thing that connects you with land, connects you with nature, because you have no protection from the elements on a bike. When you're in a car, you have comfort, you have heat, you have air conditioning. Well, on a motorcycle, if you're going to hit a hailstorm, and I've hit my share of them, and at 60 miles an hour, they hurt.
Right.
If you're encountering severe rain, you have to be very wary of your safety and what you got to do about that. Extreme heat, extreme cold, I've been through them all. And I think what that does, it gives you a respect for nature. And you understand that I'm vulnerable, not to traffic necessarily, because you are in the cities, but when you're dealing with extreme heat, you can dehydrate, you can get sick. So you have to respect your environment. Now, that might be a good segue into the Canadian aspect of it. I think a lot of Canadians do feel a kind of a wanderlust to see this country, whether it's by train, whether it's by RV, or whether it's by car. So I think for people who are born and raised here, most of us, I think, have a wanderlust to want to see Canada. Now, when you experience it on a motorcycle, again, we don't necessarily have the most benign climate. So again, you're connected with nature. You feel its impact on you. You see it. You're certainly going to encounter wildlife on the road. And as I mentioned before, you understand that it might kill you at night if a moose jumps in front of the bike or a deer jumps in front of the bike. So again, you're respectful of nature. You embrace it. And again, I can only speak subjectively to the experience. It's something I crave. It's something I live for. I want to do it as much as my schedule permits me to do it and go as far as I can reasonably go, given the way my life is configured right now. And it just enhances my appreciation of Canada. So unfortunately, I've had to postpone a trip to Newfoundland I was going to take this year because, well, the pandemic has kiboshed a number of those types of plans. But Newfoundland's one more thing to scratch off the bucket list. Yeah,
I'm there. I want to go to I might rent one of your cottages soon, and I would love to come out there. I've always wanted.
That'd be great.
To PEI, and then I'd like to get to Newfoundland as well. Have you been to the Yukon at all?
No, I haven't. Although guy I used to commute with, his brother was Justice of the Peace in Yukon, and I heard a number of stories about how cold it is in the Yukon and what happens.
But it's also just gorgeous in the
I can imagine.
Falls.
Yeah, to be honest, I think I might
level.
I don't know what the roads are like to travel up there because when you're on a big touring bike, gravel roads will kill you. It's not easy
you can't. I don't think you probably can't go up into Tombstone. I did a road trip from Vancouver up. We tried to get the Arctic Ocean, but a blizzard hit us in about early September. We couldn't make it because the roads just shut down. But no, that's there's a really good paved roads all the way up to kind of the Dawson City kind of area, Dawson. But I highly recommend it. There's nothing quite like that. It's like it's a totally different, more desolate beauty than the Rockies normally would kind of give you. And
I could see that. Yeah. I mean, I have a Jeep, so if I wanted to go, I think I'd take four wheels and all terrain.
Yeah, I think that's probably a smart. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I had a question for you. So my background, I've spent the past decade touring with a band. So I've been across Canada and then a number of other countries. And everywhere I drop into, we're only there for, a day or two, right? And so so I've been to PEI and I have this concept of PEI, but I have it from the perspective really of, I would like to think that I'm above it, but really just of a tourist, of someone who just dropped in there for a moment. So I think of the East Coast, I think about seafood, I think about, like the lobster and all of that. What is the East Coast to someone who lives on the East Coast that maybe isn't the tourist perspective?
I'm starting to come to grips with that. First of all, it's a far more hegemonous culture than the rest of Canada. And by that, I mean the people who have lived here can count several generations back. And I think that's the majority of them. I don't know what the percentage would be, but I'm willing to say it's over 70%, although the number might be changing now in PEI as more people move here. But if you go to New Brunswick or rural Nova Scotia, there's a sense of rootedness, a sense of history, and it's overwhelmingly Celtic. What I think emerges from that tradition is a folklore, a culture that is uniquely Canadian in the Atlantic sense. So, for example, the music we have here on the island is called Cayley, which is a Celtic music night. So when you go there, at least for the first couple times we went there, you realize that everyone there knows each other. They're part of a community. They might have known their grandparents, their great-grandparents, and so forth. So it connects them. The music connects them. The town hall connects them. And it's great music. And you understand that, yes, it does sound like Irish music, but there's also something that's been modified about it that makes it Canadian, in the sense that if you look at Cajun music or Creole music in the U.S., it has roots in both the Black traditions as well as French Acadian traditions, because the Acadians moved down to New Orleans. But it morphed into something unique. It morphed into its own identity. You're still sensing that history, those traditions. And I would say you find that in the music here. You might find it in the folklore here, the folk art and so forth. So I think I find that experience very different than, say, Ontario, especially Toronto, where the defining feature is multiculturalism or newness, that everyone is relatively new to the city. If you look at the census data, I don't think you'd find the majority of people could trace their families back more than 2 generations, perhaps 1 generation at best. So I think that's a big difference. It's an unbroken history.
Oh, I love that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
A rootedness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that rootedness provides the community that you found so appealing and decided to settle in because you're like, this is what I've been looking for.
Exactly. And I find it too, like, what's interesting, and I don't know if you'd find this experience in Ontario or even some of the ghost towns in the US. I love photography. It's one of my hobbies. So I often throw a camera in the back of the motorcycle and I go on day trips and take photos. And one of the things I always like, for whatever reason, appeals to me is old buildings that are collapsed or near collapse, something that looks that it might have been there for well over 100 years. So I'll post them on Facebook, and I'm a member of a couple of different Facebook PEI groups. And when I post it, I don't know this building from Jack. It's just a nifty looking thing that appeals to me because, well, it could be a set for a horror film. It could be a set for whatever. But within a couple of hours, there are dozens and dozens of people who comment about this house. They talk about when I was a kid, those people there gave us lemonade when we were kids.
Right. Wow.
And it's like this web that sends out many strands and pulls people into the center. And it's not uncommon for me to have dozens of comments from people say, oh, I remember that house. Yeah, so-and-so owned it. So-and-so bought it and left it and didn't fix it. So my God, the history just unravels at light speed when I post
in front of you. Oh, I love that.
So obviously the East Coast would have a massive fishing community. Mm-hmm. Is there a thriving hunting community there as well, especially on the island?
Not really,
No?
Because we don't have that much game hunt. There's some turkeys and so forth. There might be ducks, but if you're looking to hunt deer, moose, or any large game, we just don't have it on the island.
Yeah.
So islanders who like to hunt will typically go to Newfoundland or New Brunswick to hunt. Now, interestingly enough, one thing we do have here in Loving Spoonfuls are foxes. And they're friendly.
Really? And they're friendly.
Way. Yeah, lots of them. I love taking photos of them. In fact, the great, you come up to them on the roadside, they just kind of look at you. It's like, yeah, whatever, I'll pose. The fox is good, and you take some photos. It's like, yeah, it's like this is National Geographic stuff, and I haven't had to work for it. And other people have found the same, but that's one of the few forms of wildlife on 4 legs that you see everywhere. But they're not indigenous to the island. They came here through the fur trade, and when the fur trade collapsed, I guess they just released them into the wild, and they thrive.
Right.
Wow. I guess they have no natural predators, really.
Yeah, and another thing too, and I see this happen very often at the cottages, is the sheer number of bald eagles and hawks that we have here.
Oh, wow.
So one thing I can always count on is seeing eagles almost wherever I go. And I know there's a family of ospreys that live on Trackety Bay, which is near my cottages. So one of the things I love doing, I always ride out there, walk on the bay, and watch the osprey catch their fish. Just it's amazing watching them do their thing. And it's common. It's not like you really have to go out of your way to look for it. So again, just so much wildlife here, especially birds. So if you're into birding, by all means come here. You won't be disappointed.
Yeah. Oh.
Do you have golden eagles there as well, or just the bald?
As far as I know, we only have the bald eagles. I haven't seen any other kind. We do have a variety of hawks here, but I don't know if we have different varieties of eagles.
Well, we could probably talk to you for the next 3 or 4 hours, but we have another guest coming on rather shortly. So I'm very grateful for this. This was a very rich reflection on something that I love about Canada so much that we haven't articulated yet.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, I have one last question for you. Just
Sure.
Just a point of curiosity. Have you read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
Oh God, when I was a teenager, I've forgotten it so much. But the only thing I can remember from it is old bikes sucked. They always broke down.
So my question is, I guess maybe you don't remember very clearly. I was curious as a biker, if you have any comments as to how accurately that book represented biking across the country.
Oh, again, there's some very sketchy memories on it, but I would think it depends on the individual. If you are a person who might be more philosophically oriented or looking for spiritual meaning in things, I think it'll resonate deeply. On the other hand, if you just want to be what's called a BAB, badass biker, and be a brawler or whatnot, maybe not so much.
Well,
wow, thank you, man.
Well, fair enough. Rob, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to us.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.